Today, I'm going to share with you the formula that I created and used for years to live in different places around the world and save money and even totally eliminate your tax bill. This is the formula for what I call the Trifecta Method. I developed this when I was spending time in Bogota, Colombia, way back in 2017. And dozens of people have gone on to adapt and borrow this Trifecta Method. It's actually pretty simple. You spend 4 months living in one place, 4 months living in another place, and 4 months living in a third place. You basically have 3 different homes around the world, which you can rent or buy. We'll talk about that and some of the benefits of buying in a little bit. Now you'd ask, why do I want to live the Trifecta Method? Well, here's what happened to me years ago. I lived in different parts of the world. I traveled to different parts of the world. I spent time in Mexico, in Colombia, in all these little Eastern European countries, in the Balkans, in the Caucasus, in places like Georgia. I would go to various countries in Europe. I would even go down to Mauritius. I spent a lot of time, one of my earliest bases was in Kuala Lumpur in Southeast Asia, but I would go elsewhere in Jakarta, the Philippines. And I said, every place I go, I really enjoy it. As a nomad capitalist, I am seeing opportunities. And so you go to Asia, there's a lot of opportunities, investments. You see what's happening in the world. Eastern Europe, more freedom-oriented. Go to a country like Georgia, great food and wine, always nice to go there. Colombia, vibrant culture. Mexico, exciting. People are out in the streets. And I said, how do I take advantage of living in different places to where I have part of each of this in my life? Part of the foods, part of the cultures, part of the opportunities, part of the investment, part of just watching the world go by. I don't want to necessarily commit to one place. Now, as time goes on, I become a bit more committed and I have homes in some of these different places that I may go into occasionally. They are asset diversification. They may have gotten me residence or citizenship, but they may not be used as much, at least by me anymore. So I'm going to tell you how you can reduce your tax bill to as low as 0 using this formula in a minute, but let's flip the board back real quick and let's talk about some major regions that I see that people want to spend time in. Obviously, here you've got Latin America. So from Mexico all the way down to Argentina. For me in this region, as someone who likes cities, Mexico City is a priority due to some of the high notary fees on property. I kind of said, I kind of walked away from that. Colombia used to have a great permanent residence program for people who bought real estate. They still have a residence program, but if you want to get that to permanent, you actually have to live there. So I got grandfathered in. That may be, -1 for Colombia for you. Some people like Buenos Aires. I suppose there's some tortured souls who like Chile. Sorry to somebody like Chile. People increasingly talking about Brazil, all the way up and down. There's so many places in Brazil. I suppose you did the Caribbean to this, but let's just call this kind of mainland and Panama City. Other places in Panama are popular. Costa Rica is popular. There's a lot of places in Latin America. And so you could choose one place from this region and you could get all of what Latin America has to offer. Then there's Europe. You could decide, do I like Western Europe? Do I like Eastern Europe? So Western Europe, endless places to choose from. If you buy real estate in many of them, you can get a residence permit. I will come back to that in a moment as well. Other people think, hey, Eastern Europe, more soft freedom. I don't want as many rules, don't want as many regulations. You can go to places, again, the Balkans, the Caucasus, Turkey, for example. Then I look at Asia. Most people are going to focus probably in the Southeast Asia. You could add East Asia. I know some people like Japan, rather difficult to immigrate to. South Korea, more expensive to immigrate to. Potentially for the trifecta, by the way, one of the things that's easier is some countries may actually allow you to spend, not a lot, but some countries may allow you to spend that 4 months in one place on a tourist visa. Or you could do, let's say, some kind of like visa run. Those are getting harder to do. But your immigration issues get a little bit easier here, a little bit more flexible. So Asia's a region, Europe's a region. Again, obviously you've got, different parts of Asia, different parts of Europe, different parts of Latin America. You've also got, if you were interested in the Middle East and Africa, that could be a region. Some people want to add their own home country to the trifecta. That can be more difficult depending on where you're from for taxes. For example, Australia, if that's an equal weight, that could potentially need a lot of tax planning. Not giving you tax advice, but something that we've worked with clients on. If you're living in a country like Australia, the US, Canada, the less time you spend, the better. If your goal in leaving is to get out of the tax system and not have to pay in your home country. So what I decided was I can't really decide. There's so many opportunities in these 3 main areas. Again, you could add your own areas if you like the idea of, being in Africa. Hey, some people like Mauritius, for example. Some people like Dubai. Lots of places that you could go. You can also do areas within. So a lot of people will come to us and say, hey, I speak Spanish, or my spouse speaks Spanish. Let's just kind of I want to be in the same time zone. I run a business. I have employees. Like, I don't want to be all over the place. I mean, you can kind of create whatever it is that you want. You could have some city, some rural, some relaxed. You can do trifectas within a certain region. Some people only want to be in Europe. Now, let me tell you how you can use this to say taxes and what I discovered, because the places that I favored were not the more developed places. I do spend some time in Ireland now, but otherwise the places where I've been are up and coming places. I think a place like Kuala Lumpur offers a lot of bang for your buck. It's better than I think a lot of cities in the US and the UK. I really believe that. But what I discovered was these kinds of countries have more flexible tax codes where they might have only one test by which they say you're a taxpayer. Now, some of them are actually tax-friendly. Malaysia's tax-friendly, even if you want to live there full-time, if your income comes from overseas. But talk about a country like a Colombia or a Serbia. They may have a strict days test. If you spend 183 days in the country, you're a taxpayer. And if it's a residential tax system that many of these countries have, you pay tax on all of your income from around the world. Now, countries in the Eastern Europe, for example, may have, tax regimes. You can greatly reduce that tax. A place like Colombia does not. So if you spend 6 months in Colombia, it's tax city. However, if you spend 4 months there, they're going to make money off of you when you go to nice restaurants. You're going to buy stuff. They're going to make more money off of you than probably the average person's paying an income tax, but you won't pay income tax because you are not being triggered as a tax resident. Now, when you go to places in the West, as I said, especially if it's the country that you're leaving for tax purposes, if you're from the US, from Canada, from Australia, from the UK, again, there's specifics for every country and for every situation, but 4 months, that's probably going to be dicey. We've had clients who come and say, yeah, I want to do my 4 months in Spain, Portugal, and Australia. I mean, that gets really tough, and that's challenging. If you're open to including mostly or entirely up-and-coming places with more flexible tax codes, you can live 4 months in one home. So let's, for example, it's the winter time. You want to see Chinese New Year. You want the warm weather when it's cold. You want to follow the sun. I'm just going to follow in, put all the way over there, Malaysia, okay? Then summertime comes. So for me, right down the street from the yacht club in Montenegro, and you just roll that on right over. Then the fall comes. All right, I want Latin America. I love Mexican food, Peruvian food. I'll throw in Mexico, and I'll go all the way over here. Now, you could do this in Airbnbs. I've done this in hotels to some degree. I don't really recommend that, especially corporate hotels. I think the better thing would be to rent properties. If you are a little neurotic, as I am wont to be, you would feel a little anxious having two places that you're just not using, the other 8 months of the year. And so for me, what I found is, finding places where buying property either gets me a residence permit, in a few cases gets me citizenship. Where's that? That's Turkey, that's St. Kitts, that's Grenada. You can, Egypt, if you wanted to do that. You can buy property, get instant citizenship. Plenty of other countries where buying property gets you residence. And some of these, like Malaysia, buying a property doesn't get you residence, but the residence is easy enough. Put your money in the bank and get a residence. I am basically diversifying my life to have the enjoyment of different parts of the world. And none of these places, if I'm there for 4 months, say, hey, you have to pay. What I say is every country gets to make their own rules. I'm just the person going there. If Mexico says, we don't care, spend 4 months, that's not an issue. Now, Mexico is one country where if you've got a number of Western passports, you can theoretically go for 180 days in a tourist visa. They're really not doing that in practice anymore. So you would get a residence permit in Mexico. In many Latin American countries, you just have to show income or a bank balance. Hey, do you make $3,000 a month? Do you make $2,000 a month? All right, great, come on in. Or, show us you have $30,000 or $40,000 in the bank. In some cases, like in Ecuador, hey, put the money in the bank. Honduras, put the money in the bank. Some people want to live in Roatan. Montenegro is a place where, could you get a residence permit? Yes, if you buy a property or start a company. They're not going to renew that unless you're there for most of the year. Let's see that now that their citizenship program is gone. Maybe they'll be more open than that. But Montenegro is a country where I would suggest if you were to go there for, let's say, 2 months, what you could do somewhere in the middle here is, hey, we're going to rent a car. We're going to drive down to Albania and check out some of the cheapest real estate in Europe. Or we're going to fly up to Serbia and we're going to spend a week, the big city. We're going to eat at Franz. We're going to eat at all the top restaurants. and then we're going to come back and we're going to ask for another 90 days. Some countries allow that. I think if you keep doing it, they might ask you questions. But I think my experience in Montenegro is spend 60 days, leave for a week, go somewhere else. Listen, you can go anywhere else in Europe. You could go to Vienna. You could go to anywhere, right? And then you come back and then just ask them for another 90 days. Since they do not really offer a residence permit for part-time residents, at least now. Malaysia, you could perhaps do that. It's 90 days for Westerners, 30 days for almost everybody else. So in the 30 days, you'd have perhaps some difficulty. You could just ask them, by the way. But Malaysia is a pretty friendly country. And so if you don't want to get the MM2H residence permit, if you don't want to get the digital nomad visa some of these countries have, you could say, hey, you know what, I'm going to go to Singapore and spend a week there. Or I'm going to go check out what Invest Asian is talking about in Cambodia. Let me go to Phnom Penh and see all these investment opportunities. And then I'll come back and ask for another 90 days. Generally speaking, they'll tell you, please don't do this again. And so that's what you can do. I personally think having a residence permit or a citizenship makes things easier, makes things more stress-free. You can stay as long as you want in these countries if you have a residence permit. Now, what some people do is they'll do a modified trifecta. Hey, 4 months in Montenegro, it's a little sleepy. How many times can I go for dinner at the yacht club? I'm going to start cutting this off. And they'll either do like an extra location, or if you want to go and live back in the country you're coming from, maybe here's your block to go back there. Again, not getting you tax advice, but for certain people, let's say you leave Canada. Can you do 60 days in the summer? Do the tax planning, but 60 days for a lot of people certainly could be doable. And so you can start to modify this how you want. The issue is when you say, and again, hey, I want this big 4 months here in the middle. This should be in, Germany. I'm going to buy a property in Germany. We talked to a German tax lawyer a number of years ago. We've told you about this. These are all kind of equal. Germany's going to say, well, if you're not paying tax there, why don't you pay it to us? Not tax advice. Hashtag not tax advice. If when you have equal weighting here and you own a property in these Western countries that have much more than one test, it's going to start to be more of a project. The question in all this is, where do you pay tax? If you want to have bank accounts, for example, if you want to have brokerage accounts, they're going to ask you, where is it you pay tax? And so you can choose to pay tax in one of these countries. And so what you could do is you could modify this and say, all right, I'm going to live in Malaysia for 6 months. I'm going to trigger tax residence in Malaysia by living there. They're not going to tax my foreign source income. And then I'm going to do my shorter, summer, for example, in the EU or in my home country or whatever. The challenge for Americans, by the way, is you don't have any substantial home in here, really. I mean, again, on a modified trifecta, you'd start to argue that. On a main, standard trifecta, an American would really need to limit their time pretty substantially in the U.S. This could work to where you get a tax residence by being somewhere for 6 months and just triggering that. There are tax residences where you don't need to spend much, if any, time there. Maybe you make a fee to the country. Maybe you spend, 1 month in that country, and then, you pay some kind of fee. So there are tax residences that don't require a lot of time, so long as you promise them, I'm not going to spend and trigger tax residence in another country. You cannot spend more than 6 months anywhere else. And by the way, I mean, you need to properly plan out the tax to make sure, even 4 months in some countries could be enough to do it. Everyone has their own criteria. So what are we getting in all this? Again, we're getting 3 different places that we can go. If you're worried about what could happen in a certain place, that could be in a pandemic, that could be from a tax perspective, that could be from any number of different perspectives. Having 3 different places to go, especially if you own them, that's a pretty good thing to have. I've purchased properties, they've gone up in value. I enjoy going back to them every once in a while. Let your friends use them. And when you need a place to go, again, during the pandemic, hey, we don't want to be here. Oh, let's go over there. It's a little more comfortable over there. And so you can have places to go. I think that's a little bit less desirable with rentals. For me, Colombia got that vote, that final vote, because, hey, buy a property for X amount of money and we will give you permanent residence. And then you don't have to come and live here, but you can come and live here as much as you want. So I don't have to worry about every 90 days coming and going, but I also don't have to worry about I must spend a certain amount of time. And so again, this is a great way to see all the different parts of the world, follow the sun, as they say. Do you want to live in Southeast Asia in the hot summers, in the rainy season? Why not go somewhere else and experience something else? But the side benefit of that is, especially if you're choosing countries with more simple tax systems, you could actually potentially pay zero. You would need to have a tax residence somewhere. Again, that may eat up a little bit of your time in some cases. but it's a great way to really see all the world has to offer and never feel that you're missing out if you have the time for more adventure. I'll give you this also, by the way. I was talking to a very wealthy gentleman not so long ago. He's doing this with a young child, and they have a tutor that follows them. And so some of these countries, like Malaysia, for example, your MM2H allows you to bring a domestic worker. You can get them their own visa, and they can spend time as long as they want there. So let's say you hired someone from the European Union that was able to, stay within the EU, or they could do the 90 days via Montenegro. They get the domestic pass here, and then you do, 90 days, or you do a visa run here. You can adjust this to where you and a staff can kind of go with you if you want to have people follow along, whether it's just a chef or a driver or whomever else. Obviously, some of these people you want to look at work permits for them. But for someone like a tutor, that could have worked out as well. So play around with this. Figure out what your desired countries are. We had one guy doing the Trifecta, 6 countries, 2 months each. You can set your own pace. Obviously, you can modify this again. 6 months in one place gets you tax residence, gets you a place to have a solid base, and then you go 3 months here, 3 months there. The one thing I do think is increasingly going to be difficult is what are called visa runs. And so again, I said, hey, if you're in Montenegro for 4 months, you get 90 days in a tourist visa. Residence permit may not be good beyond the first year you have it because they're not renewing unless you're not always living there. The visa runs in some countries do work. It adds a little bit of anxiety. Long term, countries like Mexico have said, we don't like people living here and then leaving and coming right back. And so I think having proper residence, Latin America, pretty straightforward. A lot of countries in Europe have digital nomad visas. If you buy real estate in many countries, you can get a golden visa. Asia, if you put money in the bank, generally, you can get residence permits in Malaysia, Thailand, etc. But you're looking at more up-and-coming countries, which for me, Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur, 74%, I believe, cheaper than living in New York City. Obviously, New York is, I always loved going to New York when I was a kid. I'll put KL right up there against a lot of great cities at a much lower price. You're adding in flight costs getting between these places, but you're spending enough time in them to where it's not like you're constantly on the go. It's a strategy I'm seeing a lot more people use. What I'd love to hear from you is which 3 countries will be part of your trifecta. Leave that in the comments.